Okay, everybody, welcome to yet another Nova Scribes. I'm Brian. It's great to have you here. If you are joining us on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Every little bit helps us out. Tonight, we are doing a pattern language of visual note-taking. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second, but first let's start with what you have to get out of it. So our outcomes for tonight is to explore and add to design patterns for visual note-taking and graphic recording, and to also develop a critical eye for visual notes. The way that I've got this set up, it's almost like a couple of galleries that we're going to be able to go through, right? And so I will be your tour guide, I will be your docent, and you're going to have the ability to sort of peruse the galleries as I've got them set up to develop that critical eye, look at things, figure out what you like, figure out what you don't like, and, again, just sharpen your own instrument for how you look at the visual practice, okay? So a couple of agreements. If you can, be prepared to participate. I'm not going to ask anybody to go on camera if they don't want to. If you can, drop some stuff into chat if you've got questions. Ack just a minute ago modeled raising his hand. So if you've got any questions for me and want to raise your hand along the way, feel free to do so. But you can use chat. You can go off mute and I'll see it and I'll call on you if you've got any questions along the way. And then I want to give you a couple of caveats. So I'm going to show you a lot of images. I've been gathering best examples of graphic recording for the better part of the last 15 years. I'm not going to show you all of them, but every one that I've got here was shared from social media. So even I may not have explicit permission to use it here, but it was out there on social media. So I just want to give you that caveat. Also, I want to say this: design patterns are not good or bad. They are chosen by the practitioner. In other words, what one person chooses doesn't necessarily make them better or worse than another thing. Somebody may go in full color, as an example. You'll see every color of the rainbow. Somebody else might go entirely black and white or monochromatic. And again, it doesn't make it better than one better than another. It's just a lens by which we might look at these things and sharpen the way that we look at graphic recordings. Okay. So a couple roles that are in the room. Well, there's the participants. That's you all. So you are gallery visitors. I want you to ask questions, make observations, and really I want you to dial in on the nuances of some of the design choices that these visual practitioners used in the examples that I'm going to share with you. I'm Brian. My job is to be your docent. I'm going to give you a guided tour of visual note-taking design patterns. Okay? So here's how this is going to go. I'm going to do a quick overview of this thing that I keep referring to but haven't defined yet, which is a pattern language or design patterns. I've laid out 5 different galleries. We're going to look at, in order, layout and structure, lettering, illustration, color, and then we're going to end with containers, connectors, and dividers. Okay? I'd like you to ask questions and have some open discussion throughout, and you're not going to throw me. I don't have like a solid presentation I'm going to be following. So if you want to strike up a conversation, it's like, oh, what did Rachel do in this picture, right? Go ahead and bring it up. We'll talk about it. Now I have one big caveat to share with you before we go any further. A couple of you know that I had Leslie Salmon-Jew on Nova Scribes just about a week ago, and she is the longest continuously practicing visual practitioner. She has been doing this work for 40 years, which is awesome, right? I was really keyed up and excited about what I had come up with here. And she gave me one piece of advice, and I want to share it with you before we go any further. And that was, don't do it, okay? Don't try this, Brian. This is a mistake. She's tried to do it. She's seen other people try to do it, to try to decompose the visual practice into workable atoms. She just said, don't do it. Okay, so I want to give you that as a caveat. Now, why would I think myself arrogant enough to actually attempt this thing? Well, let me give you a reason why. So let me introduce you to one of my favorite books. This is a book called A Pattern Language. It's about as thick as a phone book. It was published, I want to say, in the late 60s, early 70s. But what it purported to do was to come up with, well, a vocabulary, a design vernacular for everything from city-states all the way down to individual rooms within buildings, within homes, okay? And so let's just take a look at some of these patterns, right? Okay, 1977. You can see the authors that are there, but they identified, the 3 authors identified 250 design patterns. Again, from massive human-centered environments all the way down to towns and individual rooms. This particular book was part of a trilogy that they did, but this is the one that got the most energy around it. Urban planners still use this book as a way of referring to design patterns when they are doing their thing. Okay, so it's a seminal book. It's been out for a long time, and let me just give you kind of a quick snapshot of what's in there. So check this out. This is on the organic nature of roads. Okay, and you can see that the book is just beautiful. It's got a photograph of it. It's got a diagram that kind of articulates what it's trying to say. This particular one is on the shape of paths, right? Here's another one, which is on, let's see, this one is, well, this is pretty great, down to shelves, right? Having waist-high shelves, and we still do this. If you go into most, kitchen countertops, it's just about waist height, and it's for a reason. It's for accessibility. So what they did is they went through all of these different, what we would call design patterns that were organic, that grew up in the design of buildings, and they just put it into a dictionary. They put it into an encyclopedia of all of these things. By the way, I'm going to give you access to this mural board. If you want all of the 250 design patterns, I put them in here just as a reference. Work community, industrial ribbon, house clusters, your own home, teenage society, street cafes. It's a beautiful book. I highly recommend this one. So the way that I figure, if these three authors can do this from everything from cities, from city states all the way down to the placement of shelves on a wall, why can't we do it with graphic recording? Okay. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our first gallery. Here we go. First one that I want to talk about is the gallery of layout and structure. So when I talk about layout and structure, I'm talking about the placement of things across the chart. And Ruth Ann's smiling because I just gave her this chapter to read as homework. This particular one, I think one of the person who really defined this better than anybody is Brandy Agerbeck. Okay, there's a couple that are close to it, but I really, really like Brandy's. Another one, if you want to see a simpler one, would be the Group Graphics Keyboard by David Sivit. I'll show you that one in a second. But I really, really like Brandy's because it's got more depth to it, right? There's more things that are there. And if you want to check it out, and actually at this point, let me invite you into the mural. Go ahead and share this link with you all so you can get into it. I'll drop it into chat. And you can feel free to join me in the mural if you want to. That will make all of these links live, so you can click on them and peruse them in your own time. Now, I'm going to continue to share my screen just so that it records for the Zoom call, but you can minimize that and just peruse this on your own, okay? So if you want to check out Brandy's Nova Scribes, where she went through her visual organization scale and the value of visual organization, there's the link to it right there. You've got access to it, you can do it in your own time. She walks through this one step at a time, and I think she does it very well. But let's take a look at a few of these things. So one of the design patterns when we're talking about layout and structure is the design pattern of flow. When I'm talking about flow here, I mean some connectivity, right? There's a sense of energy, motion, right? There's a sense of like maybe a ribbon that connects these things. Ruth Ann knows what I'm talking about. We just did a workshop where we talked about how to use a ribbon to connect things. I got to admit, it's one of my favorite ones to do because it's a way of connecting disparate pieces and parts. If I don't have some flow here, if I don't have a ribbon that's behind this, then I have popcorn, and popcorn is a little bit tough to see. It's just clusters of information, and I don't have any directionality that's there. And you can see here's Tim Hammond's, and if you take a look at the sort of triple ochre ribbon that he's got going on here, it's a great example of flow. Okay, I'm going to go through these kind of quick. I mentioned this one before, but it's the idea of directionality. Now, in general, most graphic recording charts, they start on the left and they flow from left to right and to some extent from top to bottom, okay? But if you can give your viewers a path to follow so that there's some sort of reference from one thing to the next, some sort of sense of navigability, again, it becomes just that much easier to see your way through, and it doesn't look like staring into a bowl of popcorn. Okay? Organic layout. Now, I think the master of this one is Kelvie Bird, okay? So if you look at her structures, her way of doing layout, they tend to be, it's almost like looking into a small pond, or even smaller than that. Maybe it's like looking into a petri dish where you're looking at different amoeba and kidneys and things and, different forms that are flowing back and forth with each other. But if you take a look at her stuff, it's almost like it just grows from its own sense. Sometimes there's that directionality where she'll throw an arrow into it, but more often than not, she invites you into an environment like this one where you can just explore it on your own. Now, having said that, even though it doesn't necessarily have that same directionality that you might see in other charts, I find this really easy to read. I find this really legible. Because even without the directionality that's there, there's good hierarchy of information, and I can tell I'm going to go from here to here to here. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about organic layout. Now again, I'm going to do these quick just because, I want to go, there's a lot here and I want you to hear as much as possible. But if you've got any questions along the way, feel free to just, pause me, throw up your hand, go off mute, I'll see it, and then I'll call on you. We can have a discussion about this one. I've spoken about popcorn somewhat disparagingly. However, I think that it can be a really good thing to do. Here's a good example of a popcorn layout. And what I mean by that is there's not one element that has hierarchy over another. You can kind of move in any direction. However, what makes this work and not just a kind of a blistering eye chart is that in this case, the graphic recorder used containers around each piece of text that was here, okay? Ruth Ann, by the way, I know we just had the discussion around use of angled text and whether or not to do it or not. This one breaks that rule. So this one uses angled text, but it does it very, very well because it's like consistently angled across the chart. So this is a popcorn chart? Yeah, go for it.
It matches the container, so it gives them their depth too.
Exactly right.
Like
yep,
really cool.
So the containers follow the angle of the text. That's exactly right. Here's another one, okay? This is one of mine, so I don't mind beating up on it. This is another bit of a popcorn chart, and I knew it was going to be one of those because it was just a bunch of like random comments that were going to come out. But the way that I tried to get around it being just kind of like a blistering eye chart was to give it plenty of space. So there's a lot of negative space between the ideas that are there, the atoms of the idea, okay? Another popcorn chart, although again, I think that this one works really well. There's a very subtle feature to this one that I think keeps it from being, too overwhelming. And that's just this use of the orange accent color underneath. So you see that in several underlines of some of the atoms of information here. All right, so that's popcorn. Let's take a look at another one. Gridded layout, okay? So grids could be columns, they could be linear, they could be rows, they could be a lot of things. But when I first got started, it was all grids. Most of my charts were just imagine flip charts side by side. That's the way that I sort of treated them. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'll still do that if I think I'm going to get a whole lot of content and it's going to be dense, just to provide a little bit of structure to it. I really like this chart. I like the use of color here to delineate the different sections. If there are any column dividers, they're very, very thin. They're almost non-existent. But I think that this does a very good job, just these bold colors in the middle of saying, okay, there's an imagined line here, there's an imagined line here, there's an imagined line here. And you have whatever it is, a total of 8 different columns of information. Bruce Van Patter, I think, is one of the masters of really gridding out a layout in advance. I've seen him take a pencil and a straight edge and knock out where he thinks columns are going to go. And then the thing that makes him so masterful is that he will often, he'll stick to it, but he'll also disrupt it when he needs to. So the column is still there, but it doesn't have that same top to bottom verticality that maybe this chart does. So it feels like there's depth, okay? When he interrupts his own columns and places element like this one just a little bit off of where the column is behind it, now it's almost like he's playing with the layers of the chart. And again, that's just masterful, okay? It's still a grid, but somehow in his hands, he's able to add some like dimensionality to it. Okay, let's do a couple more. So lists for sequencing ideas. Again, I think if you're just getting started, lists are a very safe place to go. You go top to bottom and left to right. Here's a couple of examples of lists. This one here is mine. This particular presentation, I'd heard it about half a dozen times. he had the seven C's. That was his big thing, right? The seven big C's: comparing, competing, chasing, controlling, so forth and so on, right? And because I knew that he was going to run through each one of these things and their remedy, I've got two side-by-side lists. So here's the seven C's, which are not a good thing. And then here's the remedies to each one of those things. So it's a lot of information and it's a list to capture it. Now, a couple things about, I think just good practices for lists is that if you can separate the list items with rule lines, again, that keeps your eyes from bleeding. It just provides a little bit of separation, a little bit of a breather. Okay. Here's another one. So again, lists. This is a chart from a presentation by Seth Godin. He's like, all right, I got 5 things I want to tell you. Perfect. That's a 5-bulleted list, 5-pointed list. Almost through with the structures and layout. Clusters. I think this is probably the one that you see the most out there. So a couple of different examples of clusters. And in digital, it's super easy to do clusters because you can draw these color blobs behind your content. And I think that that's a really, really graceful way of showing, okay, this is a connected thought. This is a connected thought, right? And I really, really like that idea. You could do that on paper, but I think you're a little bit more limited in your options. If you take a look at the Bicablo method of graphic recording, which I think is foundational, they do this with use of chalk and pan pastels, right? I wouldn't try it with markers. You're going to burn out your markers way too fast. Here's another example, and this was good use of markers to do it. And notice that it's not like I'm not filling everything in. In this case, the graphic recorder was stippling, okay? And they were using a colored pattern. Ruthann, I know you experimented with like a dual color stipple recently, and I thought it was really, really effective as a way of just like blocking out some color on the chart, okay? All right, so we've got that. Let's see, just a couple more on this one. Mind maps, I'm not going to belabor the point of mind maps. Mind maps are radial network diagrams. You start in the center and you branch outward. I think that they're fundamental. I like to say that mind maps are the gateway drug to graphic recording. You know, a lot of people get into this work starting with, oh yeah, I love mind maps, love what you do. It's like the next step. You go from mind map and doing this one. And again, I mentioned Kelvie Bird before. She makes prolific use of mind maps. One thing that's interesting to note about her mind maps is that in general, her connectors tend to be either vertical lines, horizontal lines, 45-degree lines, or combinations of it. They don't radiate out beyond that. And what that does is it provides a little bit of structure, otherwise something that can look a little bit chaotic. It can look a little bit like a plate of spaghetti. Word clouds, a little popcorny, but really good for many quick ideas. So you're doing, say, one-word checkouts at the end of an offsite, and 50 people are giving you one word, do a word cloud. Okay. Sense of scale. Okay, we're going to zoom out a little bit now. That's what you do when you're using scale. You zoom in and out. So what are the things that are big, small, and in the middle? And it's, if you take a look at this chart by Nevada Lane, this is an example of, you know, she's using big text for the title, slightly smaller big text for her headers, and then everything else is at this like smallest text level. So use of scale in order to indicate hierarchy. Okay, let's do, yep. Here's another chart. This is loosely based on the Groves style. You see a lot of Grove elements here. But again, your big idea is it's either the 5 practices or maybe it's the 10 commitments. That's kind of your title. Then you've got your headers. And then smaller than that, you've got these callouts that describe each one of these things. So using scale as a way of indicating hierarchy, okay? All right, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this one. Graphic recording in a comic style. So what does that mean? You record as you normally would, then you do kind of a box around it, and you fill in the negative space in between the drawing and whatever that box is. If you really want to nerd out on this one, this is Trent Wakenight. Marker Ninja, that's his company. And we do have, maybe I sent a link to it, maybe I didn't. We do have a Nova Scribes where he talks specifically about his protocol for doing this comic style. I think it's lovely, okay? We talked about this before, but the idea of topic constellations, this is a little bit like clusters, okay? It's kind of related to that. But the idea is that, you write something down and then, you kind of put a box around it, but it's more of like an organic form. Okay. Okay. The Grove talks about hierarchy in terms of glance, scan, read, and then study, where glance is the big idea. Scan are like the little ideas underneath that, the headers. Read is like at the text level. And study, okay, I have to explain this one. It is not necessarily what's below the smallest text, because it's not a thing. What they mean when they say study is that is how does the chart flow? How do the pieces and parts work with each other? What is the layout? How does part A connect with part B, connect with part C? All right. I'm not going to go through all of these design patterns. I hit the ones that I thought were most important. I will do two more, okay? One of them is the idea of doing atmospheric backdrops, okay? So the idea there is that, use of clouds, use of, things that you would find in the sky, sun, sometimes suns, right? Multiple. Nobody is going to show up and be like, wait a minute, we only have one sun in our solar system. How come you have three on your paper? The solar system police are not going to show up and give you a hard time about that, right? If you need three suns, put three suns on there. But the use of atmospherics, clouds, stars, things that you find in the sky, that's something that you see a lot. And again, I'm sharing these with you because you might choose to adopt some of these in your own work. The last one that I'll show, just because I think it's so universal, is the idea of panoramic layouts. Okay, what do I mean by that? When David Sibbett was originally defining this thing that we call graphic recording or even graphic facilitation, that's not what he called it. He initially called it panoramic visualization. The idea is that you take a look at a big picture window with an amazing vista on the other side of it, and your mind just opens up. It opens up to the possibilities. It opens up to your intuition. And so what you see is often the idea of a wide horizon, a long landscape. I mean, take a look at this one. You've got, among other things, you've got the Golden Gate Bridge, you've got waves, you've got the horizon line that's there. Here's another one from Susan Kelly, okay? And again, it's just the idea of this wide horizon and what you can imagine against that. Here's one by, I think this one is it's either David Sibbett's original or it's Renata's copy of it, but they actually mapped out the world of visual facilitation. And if you notice, it's a world, right? So the idea of doing like a large landscape. Ruth Ann, what's coming up for you?
I was curious on these panoramic ones,
Yeah.
are they like, do they build the panorama first, kind of with some understanding of the talk, or is that built in real time or even after? Because like the
Mhm.
other one you showed,
Which one? The one up here?
yeah, like the ones under panoramic versus like the ones that's backdrops. It seems like the atmospheric backdrop one, at least the second example,
Yep.
is kind of a template that gets filled in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like with something with these amazing, where it brings in all the elements like the Golden Gate Bridge and the waves, is
Yep.
that done ahead of time or how do you make that?
So that's a really good question. It's tough for me to know exactly how this one was drawn without being in the room. Given how it looks, um, I think that they had an idea of the overarching elements of it. And if you take a look at it, the first one is the history of it. Well, let's take a look at the content first, and I think that might give us a clue. It is the history and evolution of graphic facilitation, okay? And so my sense is that this was probably worked at together, and they had an idea of, okay, we're going to start with cave painting. We know that that's going to be first, right? And sometimes one of the things you actually hear about in the field is the three waves. And some people think we're into the fourth wave now of graphic facilitation, where this first wave, this was the Susan Kellys and the Leslie Salmon Jews and the David Sibbets, the people that were originally doing it, right? I kind of put myself here between 2 and 3, right? But anyway, they knew that they were going to have this. They knew that they were going to have sort of like the overlap between like, visual communication. So my sense is they probably knew the big beats of this thing. And they
Okay.
probably sketched that out. But then when they actually got into the discussion of it, like this kind of stuff. This looks like it was kind of jammed in there, which
Yeah.
fine. They had some ideas and they wanted to put it in. But you're right. This one, just because I can speak directly to it, this one here was definitely a template that was designed in advance, and then it had some word clouds dropped into it. Okay.
Because it seems like two big differences. The panoramic ones seem like they're talking about the full scope of something, like the world of,
Right.
or they talk about the history of, which in both cases, even without a firm knowledge of the topic, you can usually get some ahead of time ideas about it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, this is, I just noticed this little thing. So this was David Sibbitt's original scan at the world of visual facilitation. And again, Renata Algaro-Rondo did do a copy of it that's also really, really good. My sense is here is that he already kind of had the big beats in his head. He probably did like a thumbnail sketch at least to figure out how he wanted to do the layout of the thing. And then when he got it started, some of the smaller pieces and parts filled themselves in as he went. Okay. Good question, Raytheon. All right, so that is, let's zoom way over. Oh, I got, all right, one more. So then we've got this, and I had to throw it up here. This is an example of AI trying to do graphic recording, but notice what you got here. I'm not going to beat up on AI too much because at this point it's sort of like, it's not even fun anymore. But you've got a really just flattened hierarchy. Everything has the same height. It has the same weight. You can tell that this is flat, right? It doesn't have the same depth as some of the rest of these. Now, will AI get there? Yeah. But for right now, this is about as good as it can do. Okay. All right. So that is our first gallery. How are we doing on time? Not great. I'm going to pick things up a little bit. That one's just on layout and structure. The next one I'd like to show you is, and you can follow me if you want to. I'll summon you over here, but you can let go of it. Let's talk about lettering. Okay. I love this poster. This is the first time, I'm not going to say it's the first time that Heather did lettering, but it is the first time that she taught lettering, was actually at the first Nova Scribes, and this is her chart from it. Okay. Rachel, you might remember that one. I think we did it at Kovac, if I get that right. So, you can check out her author talk. I think if you want to learn anything about lettering, you go to Heather Martinez. She's the person. She's the guru for it, right? But you can check out her author talk on Nova Scribes. I just want to cover a couple of her things, of lettering things, because they're not necessarily Heather's. But here's a few design patterns on lettering. So the first is that using titles as word art. You know, you might remember, I don't know if it even still has this feature, but some of the Microsoft Office products where it had this little button you could click that said word art, right? And it did these really kind of cheesy chart junk, three-dimensional effects and things. Might be cheesy on a PowerPoint, might be cheesy on a Word document, definitely not cheesy on a graphic recording chart. Word art out, right? The cheesier you can make it, the better. I mean, this is great. I wish I could do that. I can't do that. So titles is word out. Go nuts on your titles is what I'm saying. If you're gonna like dedicate some time, just like really, really dial in your titles. Titles can make the chart. Visual gravity. So the idea here is that, titles anchor the top. It's the entry point. It's the way of capturing attention and saying, all right, start here, right? And then you can explore the chart as you go through it. So here's an early chart of Trent's when he was developing his comic style. So he's exploring a couple things, but you can tell he's got that bam of like the comic style, and it's right there at the upper left of the chart. Okay. Hierarchy, we talked about this one before. That aligns with the glance, scan, read, study. Headers. So here's a good example of use of headers. Excuse me, not heathers. Headers. So, consistency in headers, I think, is really important. It's just a way of like easily navigating through the chart. There are a lot of graphic recorders out there that do a good job of hierarchy, as in they can draw big for the title, not quite as big for the headers. But then where things fall apart is that one header doesn't necessarily look like the next. And it becomes a lot more difficult to navigate. I have a strong preference where if you're going to try to do hierarchy of information like this chart, you would say, okay, this style is like this, is like this. It just becomes that much more easy to navigate. Okay. So pick a style and stick to it. Don't switch up your styles on the same chart. You can go from chart to chart, but on the same chart, I'd say try to keep them together. Okay. Which one are we looking at here? Oh, I love this. So this is a cool move. the idea of micro annotations. So something you can do is you can add like tiny arrows, little notes to yourself, underlines. It's something that rewards close inspection. Okay, these may or may not be the kinds of things that actually show up on a chart from a distance, but if you get close, it's almost like a little Easter egg, for your participant. They can get in close and be, oh, that's kind of neat. I had this one organization that I worked with that was in the business of missiles. And so I printed up these missiles and put them all over the chart, just to, like hidden in trees and stuff. And my clients used to walk around and be like, oh, that's a this and that's a that. And they had a ball doing that kind of thing. You had to get real close to see it though. All right. So thinking about your body text. Now, all right, this is my opinion. There tends to be a bit of a divide here. Some people will tell you to write entirely in caps no matter what you're doing. Okay. By the way, that's a Bicablo thing. There's a lot of people that write in text, in all caps, even at the lowest level of hierarchy. All I would say is take a look at a road sign. Take a look at a highway sign next time you're on the road. They're never in all caps. And why is that? They want it to be legible very quickly. They want you to be able to read it as you're, driving at 70 miles an hour or however fast you drive. Maybe that's the express lane. I don't know. I don't mind all caps for titles. I don't mind it for headers. This is a personal opinion of mine. I really prefer sentence case just for legibility and accessibility when it comes to the smallest, most granular text. Again, that's a personal opinion. People treat it differently. This is a chart that is in all caps. I think this works because of the containers and the separation that's there. Would it be more legible if the small text was sentence case? I'll leave that up to you. Okay. In chat, Axe says, the reason I disregard road signs is because they are always screaming at me. Hopefully you don't disregard all of them. That would be dangerous and reportable. Bold headers. Okay. This is just a neat trick that you can do. If you happen to have a Neuland big one, you just turn it on its side. So you've got the broad edge there. And it just gives you a nice, quick, bold header without having to be too pretty about it, okay? Just make sure to scale up so that you're not interfering in the empty space of your lettering. I'll just do a couple more things on this. I like use of callouts, emphasis. Okay, this is a personal thing. A lot of people do this. I do this one all the freaking time. If I've got a statement, okay, I've already taken 100 words and burned it down to the 10 most obvious words. But even within those 10, I'll pick the one word that really carries the meaning, and that's where I'll switch out the color, okay? I might do everything else in black, but that one thing, I'm going to give it emphasis with a little bit of color there. We're called human beings, not human doings. What's the most important thing there? The idea of being human beings. This one, it's about presence. Everything else is just follows. And then special effects. You can go through this on your own if you want to check it out. All right, cool. Let's do a couple more. Next gallery. Illustration. This is a good one, right? Because this is where we get to draw. This is the fun one. So let's take a look at it. Some people draw really, really well in the abstract. Kelvy, if you talk to her, she will tell you that she can't draw. I think she's nuts, but that's what she says. She does draw in the abstract. Neither of these are her charts, but they were, she did inspire both of them. This one down here is Nevada, about a month after she took Kelvy's workshop. And so you can see the influence that Kelvy had on Nevada's drawing. Typically Nevada Lane does very illustrative, almost cartoonish people, but she was experimenting a little bit here. This one is Ashanti Gardner. She's always had an abstract style, right? And by the way, this was a wild chart. She did this one for the Smithsonian Institute, and check out the title, Reckoning with Our Racial Past. Man, I would have loved to have been a fly on that wall because the Smithsonian's been around for a while. Not everything that they've done has been the most PC. And so Ashanti was the graphic recorder for that one. So again, the point is both of these have a very abstract style to them, okay? I think if you want to, I don't have an example of this handy. We go back to like that first wave of graphic recorders. I think Nancy Margulies was the person that really defined the abstract style. If you want to check out hers, her work is unbelievable. Occasionally I will try to ape her style and I never come, I always fall short of it. Okay, here's a really key idea. Having an anchor image, one large image on the chart that anchors it. Now in this case, the title is the anchor image, okay? In this case, not so much. We've got this one big portrait that's there. In this case, we've got this, big title and this thing in the middle that really anchors the idea. I really like where you've got a big title and you've got a big anchor image, and they balance each other out. It provides a little bit of just a optical, balance to the chart. But having one large picture, that just anchors the chart. Picture graphs and icons, I think we'll skip that. It's just use of, drawings. Here's a couple. So silhouettes. This is one by Nevada, okay? And if your drawing isn't quite where you want it to be, you can sketch it out really lightly. I like to use like maybe the 102 marker for that. This is not a white marker, it's a very, very light gray marker. But you can kind of sketch out the forms of what the things are and then just trace around it in black, and now you got a silhouette, right? Very clear about what's going on here without having to get into the detail of it. A couple of other silhouettes, you can also fill them in, okay? So maybe you sketch out a little Bicablo person and then you just fill in the shapes that are there. Cartoons, talked about a little bit of this already. Here is Nevada's usual style that you see her draw in. Okay, so again, very, cartoonish, illustrative. I love her two little dots for eyes. You see that quite a bit. Here it is again, okay? Two little dots for eyes. Those two little dots, they can carry a lot of weight, right? If you make something cute, you can carry a lot with that. And then getting into the more realistic. So now we're talking about folks that, are really, getting into like, even beyond caricature. This is getting into like more realistic portraits, okay? And again, not to say that any of these is better, it's just these are design choices that these graphic recorders make. You can decide what works for you. Kind of minimalist, expressive faces. Let's see, I'm trying to remember her name. I think it's Lisa Rothstein, if I've got that right. And Rachel, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, Neelam, have I got it? Yeah, so Lisa is, she records or does some illustration for the New Yorker. This is not one of hers, but you can kind of see that sort of style in there, right? And then, okay, speaker portraits. This is a little risky. Speaker portraits. I mean, most of the people that I've seen that draw good speaker portraits are illustrators. Like that's how they came into the work, right? They really, really know their stuff about how to draw a person well. One of the people that I've already named was trying to draw, this is a story, it's a little bit out of school, but I'll tell it anyway, was trying to draw kind of like this blonde German speaker, and she drew the guy, and she looked at it and she's like, dang, that looks like Kim Jong-un. So she grabs a big label, she puts it on top of the guy, erases the whole thing. So she's like, all right, I'm gonna get it. So she looks at the guy, she draws it again. Dang, I draw Kim Jong-un again. At that point she gave up, right? But I would say, you can draw this if you can draw this, but doing that kind of thing is really, really hard to do. Speaker portraits. I think, who do I have here? Oh, well, yeah, of course, this is Jim Nuttall. He can draw anything. Yeah, the rest of us look at Jim's charts and we just want to quit. By the way, all of these names, these are people you should be following on Instagram or whatever. All right, simplified recognizable objects. Bicablo owns this one, okay? Really breaking stuff down into the most simple geometric seed shapes that you can, and then building up for that. It does not have to be a work of art. It just has to be recognizable. So that's on the simple side. Black line work. This is something you see a whole lot. I think that this is Bruce's, maybe? Let's see. Nope, that's Joe Azar. Okay, so Joe Azar draws a whole lot like Jim. Jim sort of kind of trained him on how to do a lot of this stuff. But the idea is that you do all your drawing, all of your text in black, all of it, and your containers, all your line work. And then you just use color to go back and add a little bit of color. So take a really good look at this chart. There's nothing that's drawn in color. So there's no lettering that's in color. You're like, well, Brian, what about this? What about where it says Lori Story? Nope. He did the outline in black and then went back into it with the orange later. Okay. So all of the color here, it happened after. This chart stood alone on its own as a black and white chart. I don't know how long before he went back and actually colored the thing. Okay. Zero preciousness. So this is the idea of gesture over polish. What I'm trying to get at here is that, again, it's the idea of just the minimum lines. One of the things that I teach is minimum viable picture, MVP. What is the least amount of lines that you can do in order to carry the idea? It's not trying to be precious. It's not trying to be overly precise. You know, it's not trying to be too good. It's just about getting the idea across. Metaphor, I think you get the idea. Here's another thing that I've seen as a design pattern, but the idea of like rough lines, uneven edges, visible strokes is the idea is that like the artist is visible in this thing. I think if I've got it, yeah, here's a real good example of it. Okay. So you can see, Ruthann, this is kind of what I was trying to get at before, but like you sketch out the forms in a lighter color and then you go over it in a darker color later to try to get it. Now, you can see what's going on here. There's a figure of somebody, maybe a kid trying to take a step forward, but you can see the hand of the artist in this one, right? You can see the work that was done. And that's definitely a style. That's a design pattern. Hand of the artist. Yeah, there. We'll skip a couple of these. We talked about cuteness before, right? You get a lot of mileage out of like whimsical figures. Okay, and that's drawing. Moving right along. How y'all doing? It's kind of the Brian show. I apologize for that. Must really love hearing me talk. I don't love hearing myself talk. Talk, you know, ask me questions. All right, we'll keep going. Yes, that is Plants vs. Zombie. Thank you, Ak. That was a thing. Okay, let's talk about color. We're going to keep this short just because there's a lot that you can learn from color theory from people that are way better than I am about it. Angela Krieg did a whole Nova Scribes just on color use. I'd highly recommend you get it. If you got access to this mural board, you can click right there. It'll fire it up. You can go and check it out. Here's a couple of design patterns. Monochromatic. And when I say monochromatic, this is beyond just the black and white. Of course, you can always just do black and white. There's nothing wrong with that. But then within maybe, if I'm going to do one thing beyond just black and white, I'm picking, you know, this much, these different shades of green, and I'm just going to stay within those shades of green. So you can go monochromatic. You can go analogous colors. What do I mean when I say analogous? I mean colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So maybe I've chosen orange and I'm going to branch out a little bit to the yellow, or I'm going to branch out a little bit to the red. Okay. I personally do this one a lot. That's a color palette I get a lot of mileage with. You could do complementary colors. So, you know, orange and blue and, you know, and different shades of. These tend to be really striking when you see them. And then here's something that Jim Nuttall does very well, but it's the idea of grouping by color. Imagine this chart entirely in black and white. It'd be a little bit tough to navigate, but notice what he does. He clusters information just by his use of color. So here, all of the orange stuff, well, we know that's related to, we know that that's related. All of the blue stuff, we know that that's related. And we wouldn't know that if you hadn't colored it. Here's a little bit more of a stark example of that. Same idea, we're clustering by color. Coloring behind the drawing. Another one of Trent's charts, that's a signature of his comic book style. So he draws something. Notice zero shading. This is a flat image, right? It's a really good flat image, but it's a flat image. But then he will color behind the thing to give it that depth so that it doesn't look quite as flat. Here's another one of Nevada's, right? She does a color blob behind it. We talked about color blobs and use of markers. This is a really good way to do it. Just do like a little circle. It's a half circle, but you know, you do a circle and then you just fill in the space around the heads. Black and white. Absolutely nothing wrong with black and white. This is Bruce Van Patters right here, okay? This is one of my charts, okay? Nowhere near as good as Bruce. I don't know why I put mine next to his. Obviously, you know, it's never going to look as good. Here's what was going on here. This was the Center for Constitutional Rights. If you haven't heard of them, you've heard of some of their clients. So they have picked up, for example, the Guantanamo Bay detainees. They pick up the kind of clients that nobody wants to pick up, right? That's the kind of work that they do. They were talking about a very, very somber topic. And so I did not want it to look like the Sunday Funnies. That's why I went on black and white with this one and a heavy use of texture, okay? So black and white. You could also do white on black. This is pretty cool, right? If you can get the black paper and the white acrylic markers or some of the other color markers that works. Here's a pro tip. If you've got the Neuland metallics, they show up really, really well in the black. It's something worth playing with. I talked about monochromatic before. So we do black, and then let's pick one color and then shades and tints of it, and we stick with that one. Okay. I talked about analogous colors. What happens when you pick colors that are next to each other on the color wheel? So yellow, orange, red, those are next to each other. Purple and blue next to each other on the color wheel. And then we'll slide over a little bit, and then we get use of midtones, okay? I'll just do a light touch on this one for the sake of time, but when I say midtones, I'm talking about colors that show up equally well between white and black, okay? So if you take a look at these, and I'll give you the Neuland codes of it, I believe that's a 600. We've got a 401 for the green. That looks like a 301 for the blue. If you know Neuland codes, you know what I'm talking about. If not, don't worry about it. What I'm trying to get at here is that these, if I was to draw a grayscale, and I had white on this side and black on this side, these midtones would sit exactly in the middle. That's what I mean when I say midtones. And why is that important? Because they work equally well if you want to color something, and equally well if you want to write or draw with it. So there's just enough contrast between black and white that you can see both of them. A bad example of that would be like dark brown. You try to color something with dark brown, you lose all of the detail to it. Or like dark blue or dark purple or anything. So use some midtones. You see a lot of, Jim Nuttall uses midtones. Greg Gersh, Mark Korsak, Joe Azar, you know, folks that are sort of in that camp use a lot of midtones. And I think if I got this right, yeah, that one's a Jim Nuttall too. Layering color. Erin Gordon's a master of that, right? I've been trying to get her to teach a class on layering color in Nova Scribes. I can't get her to do it, but take a look at what she does here. She'll use maybe 3 or 4 different colors to get some of these effects that she can do. And it's just gorgeous. She uses markers like most people paint. Drives me nuts. She's really good at that one. But you know, take a look at this red and orange and yellow that's happening here. It's like it's dynamic. It's like it's coming off of the page. Ruth Ann, that's why I said add the 501. That's exactly why I said I had 501. And then just multi-use of color. Okay. Let's just do all the colors. You know, we're gonna, you know, screw it. We're just gonna use as many colors as we possibly can. And so here's what that looks like. If you know, done well, it can look really good. I think that this is a good example. I've heard some people that will look at this though. They tend to be a little bit more conservative in their approach, and they will refer to this as clown vomit. Now again, it's not. I don't mean to like pass judgment. I don't think so, but I think that this is a choice, right? And you got to make the right design choice based on what's happening in the room. This one was one of mine, so let's throw it under the bus a little bit. That's their logo. This was a White House initiative. Okay, this is a White House Youth Policy Summit, and they gave me this logo, and I was like, oh, thank you. That's like getting the, you know, what is it, like the CBS Peacock or whatever it is as a color palette. It was like, thank you very much. So I was like, we're gonna use all the colors, right? And so, you know, for this chart, I used as many of them as I could, clustering information, using a slightly less saturated color for the container that's there. And then except for this one thought, which is, you know, the speaker had used a story that she was told where somebody in power said, you are going to be nothing. And that was the one thing that I chose to draw in black and white with a lot of empty space around it because I wanted that idea to kind of hang by itself. But otherwise, this chart, all of the charts like them, full use of color. Ruth Ann, what's going on for you?
I was curious on the one that we looked at preceding this.
Yeah.
The photograph under multicolor.
Right there.
Yeah. So when she did the background here, is that like the chalk and the pastels and things? Okay.
I can't be sure, but I'm about 90% sure that those are pan pastels, which are those, you know, little discs that you know kind of wipe a sponge around and you pick it up like you know, like makeup foundation, right? Don't do that with the pan pastels, but you get the idea, right? You kind of do this and then you just kind of smear it together.
Okay.
And it has this amazing airbrush effect. All right, let's see, where are we with time? I got one more. I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to go a little bit late. We had a late start, but I want to get you your money's worth. Speaking of which, speaking of your money's worth, don't forget, if you got any value out of this, please donate to Nova Scribes. I just dropped the link in the chat. We're going to end with Gallery 5, which is about containers. So connectors, dividers, containers. These are all the things besides the drawing and the text, everything that separates or connects the chart. Okay? So a couple of examples of containers. Again, they have to fit the text that they're in. Ruth Ann, you made the observation on that one of that early chart that the angled text also matched the angle container behind it, which I think is a really good practice. If you're going to write at an angle, angle the container that's behind it. Here's a couple of examples that you can go through on your own of containers. Okay, I would say pick the 5 that work for you and use maybe 3 of them on a chart at a time, right? Don't go too nuts on the containers. There is such a thing as being a boxaholic, where not everything has to be in a box. That's a Brandy Agerbackism, by the way. So I do have a couple of sort of cheat sheets here of different containers. Although I do think that this one, it's verging a little bit on popcorn, but I think that this one still works just because of the hierarchy of information, where you've got, here's the big idea. We're talking about co-op solar strategies, and then we're asking the question, why now and what's next? And then here are your answers. I think that the way that this is divided and contained with the use of the sun, hey, it's about solar. Of course it's going to be in a sun. Really masterful move. Why now? What's next? That's also separated out. That's what's got the most negative space around it to really call it out and orient me to here and then everything else. Okay. And you can take a look at some of the, dotted lines, color as containers. I think that this is, yeah, good chart. Let's take a look at just a few more here. Color fills. This can be risky, okay? I would say that this is a really good use of a color fill. In general, you want to go really, really light on your color fills. And what I'm talking about is like, okay, we're going to fill the whole thing in. So you're using your lighter colors. I'm 90% sure that this is the 303, the Neuland 303 here. But either that or, a colored chalk. This is one of Bruce's. He kind of got a little risky here. That's a very, very heavy, color to use. I think that's the 304, which is the denim, right? Now in his hands, he makes it work, but boy, I would never try that because otherwise you just got this big, heavy, dark spot on the chart that could otherwise weigh the whole thing down. Okay. This one works because it's simple. This is basically a principal poster. There's one concept that's here, right? And that's the fire. There's not a whole lot that's going on. If I was trying to do text in the sky or in the dirt here, like it'd just get lost. So because this is a simple chart, that works. And then something that you've already seen before, but here's that world of, that archipelago of visual facilitation. A lot of color fill here, again, using the pan pastels. Okay. Couple more on containers. I'm sorry, this is on connectors. Here's something that Bruce does really, really well is to use like these big swaths, kind of these arcs that are there. And I've seen him do this. He'll actually do just a quick pencil line to give his eye a guide to follow. But if we look at banners, dotted lines, connectors, this is a great example from Nevada, but she's got on the same chart, she's got a banner, she's got a solid arrow, she's got a dotted arrow. A really, really, powerful use of connectors on this one. And a mind map, as long as we're talking about it. See, here's the start of the mobile, and then it branches outward. I think, yep, this is one by Heather Martinez. And just look at her use of arrows on this one and the way that it connects. Okay. Dividers. So this is, again, separating the space. Almost the same thing as connectors, but in this case, we're using it just to define the space. This could have just as easily been like a color blob behind it because it was digital, but in this case, it was already a really busy chart. So I think the graphic recorder here did a great job of saying, you know what, we're just going to put a line here to provide a little bit of a visual rest. Okay. Here's a less effective example of mine. These were sketch notes. And there was a lot of content in this workshop that I thought was only going to be for a couple hours, but ended up being a whole day. So I had to cram a lot onto this one. But again, what I tried to do here is just to provide a little bit of definition by using the containers. Okay. And I think with that, yeah, design patterns of graphic recording. So I would love to hear what you all thought about that one. Questions, comments. Ak, what's going on for you?
Yeah, I was curious to know the fire pit thing with the trust vision,
Yeah.
and it had the word Irwan. What does it mean? Like, I'm not familiar with that. Who
Okay.
did they draw it for? Yeah, thanks.
I wasn't in the room, but I think what was happening with this one, and again, I was not in the room for it, but what I think was happening is that I think that this was uh, a couple of senior leaders giving their leadership vision. Okay, so I think they told a quick story, and then what happened here is that the graphic recorder translated it into a simple principle poster that was there. Now, I think that this graphic recorder did a great job. I do also want to point out one of the limitations of the tools that we've got, which is if you notice the markers, there's some lapping that's occurring. You're never going to get just a nice solid wash with this that you would if you were, I don't know, painting or using something digital. So if this doesn't bother you to see the marks on top of marks, then that's fine. It's not my favorite effect when it's there. Um, I've done this intentionally when I was trying to do like say boards on an old sailing ship, but otherwise I really don't like to see lapping. That's just me.
Yeah, it actually does look like wood, or on the flooring, or like an actual piece of wood that's actually burning, like a tree trunk. So that
It
is
does, yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
Cool. Um, Others, how did this go? Do you think I did it? Can I go back to Leslie and be like, you see? I wouldn't do that. Neelam, Ruthann, I'm curious to see how it went. Krishna, thank you for making it. I'm glad to see you. Hopefully you'll be back for the next one. All right, cool. Well, with that, let me go ahead and stop the recording. Don't go away. There's more. But thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you at the next one.